I am so pleased to be up here with Wiley Nickel, Congressman Wiley Nickel, who is the Democratic congressman from the 13th Congressional District of North Carolina. He represents the Raleigh and sort of suburban area. Congressman Nickel is actually a really interesting guy. He's been in Congress for almost 2 years, and he's probably the guy that most kind of undercuts this argument that nothing happens in Congress. I think there are very few people who've made as big an impact as you've had in the short time you've been there. And we only have 15 minutes, so I'm going to actually focus on crypto because for obvious reasons. And the question that everyone asks is, why has crypto politics shifted so dramatically? And I think you probably can answer it better than anyone.
Yeah, I mean, this was one of the places where, I think in divided government, we identified quickly as a place that there could and should be bipartisan work in Congress. We're talking about democratizing finance. Huge. This is a big issue that will impact, future generations. And in this Congress, we are on track to be one of the least productive Congresses in our nation's history. I have voted for Speaker 19 times in the last year, and but this is a place where we actually got something done in a bipartisan way. So far, though, we've only done things that are must-pass bills together, with Democrats and Republicans in the House. It's the debt ceiling. It's saving Eastern Europe from falling to Putin's hands, and passing a budget. But this was a bill we worked on for the last year and a half in a bipartisan way. We passed Fit 21 through the House thanks to the support of, I know, a lot of people that I've talked to in this room who pushed to educate members of Congress on the issue. Passed with 71 Democrats, sent a really strong message to the Senate that this is an issue that can and must stay in that bipartisan space.
So the two, among the various things that you've done in Congress, the two very consequential things were you were the lead Democratic sponsor of the legislation, the Congressional Review Act legislation, to overturn the SEC staff accounting bulletin that prohibited banks from custodying crypto assets. You were the lone Democrat on that, and eventually the bill passed the House on a bipartisan basis, 21 Democrats, I think, and then went through the Senate on a bipartisan basis, including this majority leader, Chuck Schumer, which is extraordinary, over the president's veto. And then later, very shortly afterwards, you were maybe the lead Democrat or among the handful of Democrats who were able to corral 71 of your colleagues together to get the Fit 21 bill. Given for everybody in this room, regulatory clarity and Congress's role here is critical. What worked with you in your dialogue with your Democratic colleagues to get them to go from a reflexive no to a lean-in yes?
It's just educating people. Politics is pretty simple. You just change happens when people make their voice heard. So hearing from their constituents, and then educating folks. And the folks that we got, including Nancy Pelosi, a number of others, understood the issue. They got to the second and third and fourth levels, and we were able to explain why this amazing technology needed to continue to move, why we needed to keep innovation in the U.S., and frankly why passing Fit 21 would prevent the next FTX. And that was really the place we focused. And for Democrats, it was a simple message: love crypto or hate it, you should want to have regulation. That's what we're trying to do. Nothing especially partisan about that, filling these regulatory gaps between the SEC and the CFTC. So great bill, and again, I think when we're looking back at this Congress with probably not a lot of success on bigger bipartisan issues, I'm very optimistic that this could be one of the bright spots.
So Fit 21 is now in the Senate. There's a lot of work being done there now. I know a lot of the senators are looking to you for guidance and thoughts in terms of what to do about the legislation. What's your sense about what's going to happen in the Senate? It's a tough time, obviously, election year, not much time left.
Yeah, I think the good issue, the main thing is there are a majority of U.S. senators, there's a majority of members of the U.S. House that want to get this done, and I think hopefully the next thing that we see coming back to the House is some good version of Fit 21 plus a stablecoin bill, plus maybe the marijuana safe banking bill. that is a big priority for Senator Schumer as well. So maybe those three things together, again, working on this in a bipartisan way, not trying to, make it a political football, is the, what I think I see coming back. And the point that I really try to stress when I talk to folks is if you want policy changes to be long-lasting in Washington, they need to be bipartisan. If it's just one party pushing something, another party gets in power and they're going to just wipe it out. So the best way to support the industry is to focus on keeping these things in that bipartisan space.
One of the interesting things to watch is how aggressive the SEC has been in fighting legislation. As a Democratic member of Congress, you obviously see a lot of your colleagues being particularly sensitive about the SEC's posture on the legislation. How do you interpret that, or what's your read of the SEC's influence in this process?
I've been certainly one of the Democrats very frustrated at Gary Gensler's regulation by enforcement, his approach to the issue. And the point I think that it was important for me to make over and over is that Gary Gensler and voices like Elizabeth Warren are not the only voices in the Democratic Party on this issue. There are many Democrats of all, in all parts of the party, liberals, moderates, conservatives, who feel the same way that I do, and many other members of the Biden administration. So, I think, I think the big point is that Gary Gensler is not the main voice for Democrats, and we got to show that again in one of the biggest and best bipartisan votes. That not everybody agrees with Gary Gensler. And you got to see that with that SAB 121 accounting vote in the Senate, with Chuck Schumer voicing his very helpful opposition that we want to continue working together. And the statements we've been getting from the Biden administration since then have been really positive and productive. They're not saying they want to veto these, Fit 21. They're saying they want to continue to work on it. So we see that, if you're kind of reading between the lines, is a really good signal from the Biden administration. And now they have to continue to lead on the issue, and the ball is in the Senate's court, and it's in the White House, the Biden administration's court.
One of the things we've talked a lot about at Coinbase and in the industry is the large demographic of crypto users. So the numbers you can quibble on, but roughly 17 to 20% of the adult population. So let's say 50 million Americans own crypto, more Americans that have union cards than own electric vehicles. We've started an independent organization that I think you know this, in the 2 weeks leading up to the House vote, we had 400,000 additional signups. We have 1.1 million grassroots crypto advocates. Do you think the emergence of the crypto voter is a real thing? Is it impacting your colleagues? The fact that the demographic is generally young, diverse, has in the past skewed Democrat but is gettable. What's your read of that?
I think it's a really important part of the electorate. There are a lot of people who are really focused on this issue, and that's great. We should be accountable to the voters, and the voters are the ones who send us to Washington. So, hearing from our constituents on issues, we get data every time folks contact us about whether they're for or against something. If you want to go back to Washington, you need to have the support of your constituents. So, the process of making their voice heard on these issues is really helpful and important for pushing any legislation in Congress. And the Stand With Crypto effort, really positive group. It's a huge number of people who are making those contacts and just frankly educating members of Congress. We deal with so many different issues, and having folks that we serve, that represent, hopefully that we know, somehow explaining an issue to us is really important, because we just have a ton of issues we deal with every day. And if you can just educate people, you're going to get into the right place.
Well, something happened a couple of weeks ago which surprised me, may have surprised you as well. But Donald Trump came out with a very full-throated endorsement of crypto. How do you read that? Do you think he sees the political kind of potential of it? Do you think the Biden people will respond? Or how do you think crypto will figure in the presidential? What's your guess?
Yeah, obviously I'm no fan of Donald Trump. I think he's trying to politicize any issue he can that can get him votes. the fact is he didn't really do anything and didn't really care about the issue when he was president. So I think that's worth noting. But his attempts are to take attention away from the issue, to get votes. I'm just focused on the public policy piece, and that's only going to move in this Congress if it stays out of the more partisan lens with folks like the former president. And we've got an administration doing a great job in a lot of ways, and I think the ball is really in their court now to continue working with Congress to provide meaningful legislation that President Biden can sign, and I think we're on track to do that. If we can move something through the House and Senate in a bipartisan way, I feel really good about getting it onto the president's desk.
I mean, it's a really interesting election. You've got a current president, a former president. The issues are going to be pretty vivid in terms of the contrast between the two. Like, what's your sense of what the presidential race is going to be like?
Yeah, I mean, it's I believe the most important presidential election of our lifetime. We keep saying that over and over, but this one really is important. I just know I represent North Carolina in the U.S. Congress. Our state, I believe, is a state that if Joe Biden wins North Carolina, he's going to be president again. So it's really the presidential election is an election about maybe 6 to 8 states. It's not a national election. It's just an election with these swing states. North Carolina, certainly being one of them. Hillary Clinton lost our state by 3 points 8 years ago. Joe Biden lost it by 1.5 points 4 years ago. I think we're probably 1.5 points more to the center. So it's going to be close. We're going to be a state that everybody certainly should be watching for the presidential contest.
So you've already announced that in 2026 you plan to run for the Senate. What's your sense? Like, why would you want to jump back into this? I mean, you've already built a pretty extraordinary track record for the short time you've been in the House. But what's your interest in going into the Senate in 26?
Yeah, I got gerrymandered out of my seat in Congress. We won a Republican seat in the last election, and there's just a lot more work to do. And you need folks in Washington willing to make Congress and make these institutions work in a bipartisan way. Gerrymandering gets rid of the incentives to work together. So getting rid of gerrymandering, I think, is one of the top ways to do that. But in the Senate, you really can move legislation working together in a bipartisan way. That's the focus for me and the hope. And in a state like North Carolina, that's always a 50-50 state, always is going to be one of the states that has a real big say there.
But in a purple state like that, particularly when you won in the House, you won in a Republican district, and you managed to, I think it was one of 5 Republican districts, and that turned. So, the shorthand we all have is that politics has become so tribal that you just sort of stick to your fringes, and we all just can't get along. But you seem to be able to transcend that. Like, how do you do that? Like, what is the formula to a less divisive political atmosphere?
I mean, I think you just have to step back and realize that Democrats, Republicans, everyone loves their country, and you just. I do my best every day to sort of move things into the, what's best for the people we represent. What can we work on together, and there's less and less of that. You can see again by the fact that we've accomplished, so few big things, but we need to, and we need Congress to work, and that's for me an incredibly, amazing, project, a challenge to work on, and I just know. I'm not going to fix it myself, but I can make a dent, and that's what you try to do when you go to Washington.
So, final question, because a lot of folks here are obviously interested in what we started our conversation with, which is regulatory clarity, and we put the State of Crypto report out that people here have seen. Talked about something like 58% of Fortune 100 companies have blockchain-based projects underway. 38% have announced new projects over the last year, even in the down market. That kind of broad adoption is obviously, there's a bit of a lag in terms of where our policymakers are in understanding that. But how do you sort of see the trend lines we're seeing in the corporate sphere in terms of how it's going to ultimately bleed into our politics on an issue like this?
No, I mean, the report makes it clear we are losing jobs, to other countries. We've got to keep those jobs here. We've got to keep that innovation in the United States. And the approach from Washington really matters there. So that's been, one of the things that, many of us have been very focused on, keeping innovation here, keeping jobs here, and making sure, that we provide the regulatory clarity that the industry needs. We're not always worried, again, about getting sued for who knows what reason by the SEC. So, if we can do our job in Washington, that will transform the way we approach this industry in the U.S. And frankly, the rest of the world needs our leadership too. I traveled to Abu Dhabi, Singapore, Tokyo to meet with the regulators for crypto. They said the same thing. They need the U.S. to act, and if we do, it will transform the way we move into Web3, and this will be, I think, an issue we look back on. And it'll be, if the people who are against Web3 are going to be like people in the 90s who are against the internet. So, history's on our side here, and we have a chance to do things that will turn dictatorships into democracies, democratize finance, and for me, as someone, in Congress, make things a lot cheaper for my constituents. They'll be able to move money and do things, without losing a lot of the money that they earn. So, incredibly, important and amazing technology. But the one point I think worth just ending on is, what we did in Congress really mattered. We really want to make sure that this is an issue that stays in that bipartisan space. Making it a political football is going to set the whole industry back years. And we got to see folks, again, like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer coming out in a really good way on this issue. And I did not want to have folks like the former president say that this was his issue, because it's not.
Great. Well, let's make that the final word. Congressman, thank you for your leadership, and thank you for joining us today.